Today I want to show you how to print on fabric or a fabric-like substrate that you can use in your sewing or in your mixed media work or your art journaling. And I got this idea from a YouTube video where I saw this lady, Wen Redman, uh, was interviewed about her textile art. And I was so interested that I bought her book, Digital Fiber Art, Combine Photos and Fabric. Now, I have to confess, I just got this book and I haven't worked my way all the way through it yet. So what I'm doing right now is more of an experimentation rather than a tutorial. But I'm sure you'll pick up on this very quickly, how to do it. So I experimented, and I'm going to explain what this is and what I used in a second. But this little piece that I created here, I'm not that fond of the colors I selected, but it is just an experimentation. And what I have done is I have created textured pieces of fabric. Now I'm putting fabric in quotation marks right now because I'm going to explain what I mean by fabric in a second. And then I put it through my printer. Yes, I put the base of this down through my printer to print my background, but I had a layer of texture created with light molding paste. And I'm going to show you how I did that and talk about the properties of this product as well when it comes to doing this kind of art. Then I took the individual pieces and I put them through my embroidery machine to do these backgrounds and to create these images that are on here as well. Then I trimmed them down, sewed them together, added some borders, did a little easy quilting, which you probably can't see on the back here, and I had a completed wall hanging. Now, of course, this was an experimental piece. So I'm going to take you through this and show you what I've learned so far, keeping in mind that this is still an experiment, and we'll see what we create. So these squares were each done using what is known as, and I'll just leave it here so you can see it. This is called tearaway or cutaway stabilizer. Either one will work. This is basically going to be our substrate, what we're going to put our molding paste on, add some color to, put it through our printer, then do some stitching on top of. And that's what each one of these squares look like originally. Now, I've cut these off a roll, and at the moment they're just rough cuts. I want to cut these down to 8.5 by 11 sheets because that's what will fit through my printer. Then I'm going to create some texture on here using the light molding paste, and I'll show you how to do that. And then we'll move on from there. This is a very unique technique. This is not meant to be put into a quilt, because washing something like this, I'm not sure how it would stand up. Also, this is more a wall hanging art rather than a quilt, because I don't think anybody would want this as a quilt. It would be too stiff. It would be nice and fluffy and soft and cuddly. So I'm going to go off for a second, cut down my sheets of stabilizer so that they're 8.5 by 11, and then I will return. Okay, so what I've done now is I've taken 2 sheets of this stabilizer, this tearaway or cutaway stabilizer, which, by the way, is available wherever you buy embroidery or sewing supplies. It comes on rolls. It's not cheap, though. I'll warn you of that. So I've taken 2 sheets of this, cut them down to 8.5 by 11, and I've just used some painter's tape to keep them flat on my work surface. And now I'm taking light molding paste. Now it has to be light molding paste because something you have to remember right from the start of this. These are going to go through your inkjet printer. And in order for them to go through successfully, you've got to keep your texture that you build up thin and low, because your printer can only handle something that's so thick to go through it. So you might want to do an experiment with a couple of sheets of, say, cardstock or something like that stuck together to see just how much clearance you have. So this is my paste, and it's very soft. Where do you get it? You can buy it at a craft store. You can buy it at an art store. And it's very soft. It's almost like a whipped cream or a frosting. So you can do this in a variety of ways. you can just lay down a layer of this, a very thin layer, and make little ridges and marks in it using a pencil end or a sponge or whatever you've got, any mark making tool. And those of you that do a lot of mixed media know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to mark making. I'm going to use some stencils, and I'm just going to spread my stencils out here and spread a little bit of this on. Now, I said a very thin layer, and you don't have to make your stencil even. And what I mean by that is you don't have to feel that you have to fill in every part of the stencil. Now you notice I have a little residue paint on this stencil which is coming off, and that's okay because I'm going to be putting other colors on top of this later, so that's not a big problem. I'm going to do the same here. And you can see I'm just using a very thin amount. And again, I'm not worried about the coverage. If I don't get every opening in my stencil, that's not a problem. Okay, let's take these stencils off here. Let's see what we've got. Now you will want to wipe down or wash off your stencils very quickly. Now you see I got a little color in here because that was residue. I'd have a tendency not to clean off my stencils, but that's okay because this is not my only layer. Now what I'm doing is I'm just taking a little bit of that paste and I'm just spreading it very thin in some of the more open areas. Just another way of adding texture. And again, I cannot stress too much. Keep your paste thin. Now, if I want to add a little more texture, I can just take my spatula and just randomly use the edge of it or whatever just to create some texture. Again, keeping it light, keeping the texture so it's not too thick. I want this to go through my printer. Maybe put a little more here. Now I could continue doing this until I get exactly the coverage I want. That's a little thick. I'm just spreading it out. Now, you can use other types of pastes as well. There are many on the market. Some have sand in them, some have glass beads in them, some have fibers in them. You can use any of those. Just make sure you keep it thin. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let this air dry. Now, could you apply a heating tool to this? You probably could, but I find that air drying makes it a little bit better. Also, you want this to dry thoroughly. You want all of these steps to dry thoroughly. So don't be impatient with this. Let it do its thing. So I'm going to leave this, and I'm probably going to leave it for about an hour to make sure it's well dry. Okay, so my light molding paste is now dried on both of these pieces, and you want to make sure, as I said before, this is absolutely thoroughly dry before you go on to the next stage. And the next stage is to add a color wash to this. Now you can do this in a variety of ways. Color wash is basically taking your acrylic medium, whether it is paint, it could be paint in a tube, it could be folk art paint, it could be liquid acrylic, it could be spray inks, it could be alcohol inks. All of these will work on this, so it's up to you what you want to use. Today I am going to make a color wash using liquitex inks that are very concentrated color. And I just picked 3 colors out from this, a blue, a red, and I picked an iridescent bright gold just to try that, to see what effect I can get. This is a lot of experimentation here. So I'm just going to put a couple of drops in here, in each one of these. I have water in each of these little cups. Put them here where you can see better. And the more of these I put in the cup, the darker the color I'll get. And then I have a paintbrush right here, and I'm just going to swish it around in each color. I'll start with the blue, and I'm just going to lay down a little bit of color. And I'm also not going to worry about the coverage of this. You can see I've got some spots that are still white, and that is okay. I don't want this to be too dark. We'll do it on the other one, because I will be printing over top of this. And also, the reason that I taped down my substrate, my tearaway stabilizer, is because this will make, because it's wet, will make your paper bulge. So I've just got a little water off camera here. Then I'm just rinsing my brush out, and now I'm going to my next color. And I'm just sort of blending these two colors together, creating sort of a gradient effect. And I'm going to do the same over here. Now again, I don't know if these colors are going to work that well with what I intend to print on this, but this experiment. You just experiment. And now my third color. Now this one isn't very dark, oops, at all. Almost spilled it on everything. It doesn't seem to be blending with the water very well. So what I'm going to try and do, again, we're experimenting here, is I'm going to take some of my color, I'm going to place it directly on my substrate, and then take my wet brush and see what that will do. And I've got a little bit more color there. It's more subtle, but that's okay. I'll do the same thing over here. Okay, so you can see some of the texture popping up because the light molding paste is acting like a semi-resist as well. And again, that's going to depend on the mediums that you are using. Now I might just take a little bit more of this and just brush it up on the other parts just to make them maybe blend a little bit more. So you can sit around and play with this all day long to get the effect you desire. Now you can see that I've gotten my stabilizer pretty wet right now. So I think that's it. I think I'm going to leave that for now. And again, I'm going to let this dry very thoroughly and air dry. Let it air dry. So that means I'm going to leave it for an hour or two. And when I come back, I'm going to put another layer of a special agent or medium onto this that will allow the ink from the inkjet printer to be picked up on the substrates much more easily and effectively. Okay, so now my color wash is pretty much dry. It's still a little damp, but it's good enough for the next part that I'm going to do. And I'm going to use a product called Digital Grounds for Non-Porous Surfaces. This is a medium that you paint on or brush on to your substrate, and once it's dry, it will pick up the ink from your inkjet printer and hold it much better than if you did it without this. Now, the one problem with this product is they no longer make it. This is by Golden. But there is another one that's available, and you can do a search for this. It's called Ink Aid, and it's the same kind of thing. Now, this stuff is not cheap. When I bought this, they were discontinuing it, so they had it on sale for $8 for this bottle. But I think the Ink Aid is around $23.99 US online. And so just do a search for it. You'll find it'll come up pretty quick on Google. So basically what you do with this is shake it up well and then pour some of it, you don't need a lot of it, onto your substrate, and then just brush it into your substrate. Now you're going to have to let this dry, and again, let this dry thoroughly before you do the next step, which is to print whatever it is you're going to print on top of this. Now, I'm just finishing this up here. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to let this dry thoroughly. But let's just talk for a minute about what I'm going to print on this. This is where you can use your whatever program you like. I use Adobe's Photoshop Elements. And take your image, whatever the image is, and I'm doing sort of a collage image. And I've created two pieces here. They're both the same image. But what I did was I layered several images together. And that is something that's not in the scope of this production to show you how to do that. But it's not that difficult to do layering. So that's what I've done. I've taken, actually, my main background is actually a scan from one of my art journal pages. And then I found some PNG files of trees. And I found some PNG files of butterflies. And I layered them on top using Adobe Photoshop Elements and adjusted transparency, and so I came out with that. Now this is just printed on ordinary copier paper because I want to see what it's going to look like. This version of it, that's more in sepia tones, you could do this in Adobe Photoshop Elements or Photoshop. But what I did was I used another program which actually is suggested by Wen Redman in her book that I showed you earlier, called Gruntastic. And what it does is it takes whatever image you put into it and makes it look very grungy. And there's a whole bunch of different styles and color combinations that you can use for this. So I'm going to print one of these on one of these sheets and the other one on this one and just compare them, see how they turn out. But of course I can't do that until these are completely dry. So now the digital grounds have dried and I have put this through my printer, and so these are both printed. Now they are a little bit on the wet side, so when they come out of your printer, do not touch them, just lay them flat to air dry. And you can see there is texture here. It's hard for the camera to pick the texture up, but it is there. And one of these was done in color, and one of these was done in the grunge using the program I mentioned earlier. So you can see this does a really nice job. Now, if you want, you can do the same process on cardstock, and it will work with that as well. So for those of you that are mixed media people and you don't want to delve into the area of fabric, then you can use this on cardstock and do the same method. Now, what am I going to do with these? Well, once this part has dried, I am going to spray it with a fixative. And I have a low odor clear gloss fixative, and what this will do is just protect the inks that are on here. It doesn't make them waterproof, so this is not something you would create on fabric or use it as fabric in, say, something like a quilt or whatever that you were going to wash. No, this is strictly for something that's going to be put on display or used in whatever other way that doesn't involve having to take it down and wash it at some point in time. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these two pieces next. I could frame them. I might actually do a little bit of embroidery quilting over the top of these, and then I'll see where it's going to go from there. But right now, I'm going to give it a shot of this and let it sit and dry. And I think I'm going to leave it overnight, just so I know that everything is well adhered and well cured. So I've decided I'm going to make another couple of sheets, and I have an idea in my head for a wall hanging, but I'm not sure, it's not fully developed yet. But what I think I'll do this time is I'm going to, on my tearaway stabilizer, I'm going to lay down a layer, a thin layer of the flexible light molding paste. And this time, instead of using a stencil, I'm going to use a catalyst tool to make marks and maybe some other objects that I have laying around. So I'm just going to get a fair amount of this spread out. And even as I spread it out, it's making some texture as well on here. And I did tape my sheets down to my work area again so that they will stay relatively flat. Okay. Now again, you got to keep it thin. Okay. Here's my catalyst tool, so I'm just going to now, I'm not sure if these are going to be too high or not. That paintbrush here. I'm just looking at some of the little higher lumps of the molding paste, and I'm just sort of smoothing them down. Okay, I think I'm going to leave that as it is, and I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to do another wash over the top of it, and then I'm going to put the digital grounds on it, let all that dry thoroughly, and then I'm going to put it through the printer just like I did last time. So I'll show you what the result of that is in a moment. Okay, so I printed out 2 more sheets of my textured fiber art, and you can see that I altered the image. I used the original elements of the first 2 images, but I just blew up the tree a little bit and put the butterflies more in the foreground. So I have these 2 ready to go. So now I'm going to do something with these. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I want to make them into a wall hanging. So I have an idea about trimming these down, possibly putting a sashing or a border on these that's going to give it sort of a shadow effect, and then put 4 of them together, and then put a border around that, and then I'm going to do some quilting on this as well. That's my idea right now. Not sure. We'll see how this works out. So here's what I've done with those pieces that I've already created. I put some borders around them. I made it look sort of like they were in a window. And I added this butterfly fabric around it as well to pick up the butterflies that are in the actual pictures themselves. And this fabric also had the colors that are in the prints themselves. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to think about how I might add some quilting to this.
So I have the final piece done. I have now quilted it. I just did in the stitch around each one of those pictures and along the border lines, and I did some squiggly, or not squiggly, but wavy lines around the outside border, and I added a binding to it, and I think it's come out pretty cool. So this will make a really nice wall hanging. I have to find a spot for it in my house, but that's how you do it. Now, there are more techniques that I haven't even touched on yet, that I haven't even tried, because I haven't finished going through Redmond's book yet. But when I do, I'll try some other things, and I'll make some more videos to show you. But here's a good way to mix your mixed media supplies with your quilting and sewing supplies to come up with something that's very unique. No two of a kind, really. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and stay tuned for future ones about using this method.